Hello and welcome to another episode of Ewell Acres. Today we're going to continue on talking about our gardening plants discussions by talking about annuals, the advantages and disadvantages. Let's get started. First off, today we are looking at what is an annual. An annual is a plant that lives its entire life cycle in one season, meaning that it germinates from seed, it will grow up to be however large it is, and then it will produce fruit, flower, and die all in that same season, meaning the roots, the stem, and the foliage all completely die. Typically, when you're looking at annuals, there are going to be a few advantages that you can take a look at. Before we continue on talking about the advantages and disadvantages of annuals, I'd like to a shameless little plug. If you like what we're doing, if you're gaining value out of these videos, don't forget to subscribe, click on that bell for notifications. Not only does it help us with the YouTube algorithm, but allows us so that way we can continue to learn from each other with each other. Now, when you're looking at annuals, there are going to be some very distinct advantages why people absolutely love growing them. Typically speaking, they are going to grow a lot faster than your biennials or perennials, meaning that you can not only germinate them faster, but you can get them to an age to be able to harvest them and gain viable produce from them, meaning you get to eat them deliciousness much sooner. Also, oftentimes, they are going to be much smaller and easier to grow. Just due to that nature of it having a much smaller life cycle, they're not going to have as much energy to be able to put into it, meaning that they're going to have a smaller root system and a smaller overall plant size. Many of these annuals, when you go to actually produce them, they have flowers, they're going to produce seeds. And if you're lucky enough to be able to produce that seed, oftentimes they're going to be easier for you to harvest that seed, so that way you can continue to plant them year after year and not having to go back to the store to purchase seed. Now, in doing this, there is a danger if they are F1, F2 hybrids. We'll talk more about that later in other videos of what that actually means. But if you're gaining your own seed, the parent is going to oftentimes be a little bit different from the children. So that way, when you're going to plant seed, if you're looking to have that person exactly, or the child directly similar to the parent, it's not going to be as similar. So that is one thing to keep in mind. But when you're dealing a lot with heirloom varieties, this is not going to be as big of a problem. And if you're lucky enough that you're able to get the flowers to bolt and then to blast their seed, meaning they're able to push the seed out of the flower and plant around them, they will actually be self-planting to be able to perpetuate their own growth. Most commonly, you're going to find this in onions, carrots. Now, I understand that these are biennials, but with most growing seasons and getting them colder, they are commonly treated as an annual because of that nature. Another major great side effect of annuals is because they're able to readily produce a lot of seed very quickly year after year, they are generally going to be much cheaper in price as well. So that way, you're able to purchase a lot of it and grow a lot because it's going to be a lot simpler on your wallet. One other major advantage that you can take a look at with annuals is, we talked a little bit earlier, is because they live their entire season and die with that one season, they're often going to be much smaller, which means you can grow them in a much smaller space. So if you're very limited on space, you could very easily grow annuals in container boxes or in a smaller area. Along that same route, if you decide that you don't like annuals whatsoever, there's a variety that you're growing that you're just not a fan of, that's okay, because they're going to be done in one season. You can go ahead and prep that same area very quickly and plant something else that very next season. Now that we've talked about some major advantages in dealing with annuals, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the disadvantages. Earlier we talked about how seed cost is going to be very cheap. Annuals are going to be very cost effective. The downside to that is, if you do have to purchase your seed because you're having to purchase it year after year, that cost for that 1 year is going to be very small. However, long-term speaking, you're going to have reoccurring costs when you're dealing with annuals. And so your long-term costs for those same plants are going to be more expensive. When you're dealing with some perennials, let's say that you decide that you want to purchase a peach tree or an apple tree. Yes, it is going to cost $50, $60 as of 2021 spring when I'm looking at prices and trying to expand my orchard. It is going to be very expensive to get that initial cost for that one tree. It is a huge difference in cost spending one tree, whereas if I were to purchase that same amount in lettuce, I would literally have hundreds of thousands of heads of lettuce, if not millions of heads of lettuce, that I could get for that exact same price. But I'm going to have to purchase it year after year after year. That one fruit tree, though it may cost a tremendous amount this year, that's going to be just like the giving tree. It's going to give year after year after year, and I only had to purchase it once. Now, another disadvantage that you're dealing with annuals is oftentimes they're going to be smaller plants, meaning they're going to have a smaller root system and there's going to have limited reach in water. So they're going to use up nutrients a lot faster as they're growing, but they're also going to have limited in water. Oftentimes annuals are not going to be as drought resistant because much of that water is going to be within that first 6-8 inches of the subsurface layer of your soil. And so because of that, in order to keep them growing so they don't get to the wilt point with the plants and they can continue to live, you're going to have to water them much more frequently. Also, another major problem that is a downside with annuals, because of the nature of the plants, they tend to have a lot more pests. Typically speaking, you're going to have a lot more aphids, you're going to have a lot more diseases that are prone to attacking annuals versus the perennials or some of those that are able to build stronger, more immune system to combat some of those diseases. The nice thing though is if you do happen to have a disease that kill it, it's not a big deal. It's only alive for one season. You can very easily combat that. One way that you can easily combat this issue of having much higher disease or aphid or insect counts when you are dealing with annuals is what's called crop rotation. Because they're only in the ground for one season, you can very frequently move these plants from pot to pot to pot or from area to area. So those bugs that are more susceptible to a particular type of family with insects, go ahead and plant something different there next year to help break that cycle. One very common thing that I like to talk about is tomatoes. Tomatoes can have a major effect with the tomato spotted wilt virus. This can very easily, utterly devastate plants, peppers, that entire family. But one way to easily break that is to take the tomatoes and plant them in a completely different spot next year. Now, one thing to keep in mind is with this tactic, you need to understand plant families. There are some families like potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, they are all within that exact same family. If you are planting tomatoes in one area and then decide, well, I'll just plant peppers there next time, it doesn't work that way because they are cousins, they are in the same family. So by understanding plant families, you can understand what's going to help break that disease cycle to better have results in preventing the insects or diseases that can affect the different plants. One other major downside in dealing with annuals is that they're going to take a lot more work. With perennials, once you get them going, that apple tree, yes, you have some pruning, you have some occasional insect control if you need to do that, you have your harvesting, but by and large, for the amount of work that you have to put in, for the amount of produce that you get from season to season, is going to be very minimal. When you're dealing with annuals, there's going to be a lot more weeding, there's going to be a lot more watering, there is a lot more maintenance involved in getting that produce out of that exact same plant. So that is one thing to keep in mind. You are going to be needing to put a lot more time, effort, and energy into production for that much smaller plant. So we've gone over some of the disadvantages and advantages of annuals. So let us know in the comments below. Are there some advantages, disadvantages that we may have missed in dealing with annuals? Let us know in the comments below. I'm always eager to see what other people are dealing with and how they can best combat that. One other thing to keep in mind, there are many plants that I've talked about that you're dealing with, tomatoes, peppers, that are often in colder climates considered annuals. However, if you're dealing in a more tropical, warmer climate, then tomatoes and peppers in their native areas where they're from warmer can be treated and are often perennials. So that is one thing to keep in mind. Based on whether you classify a plant as an annual or a perennial can change drastically due to what your own climatic conditions are. When you're dealing with annuals versus perennials and trying to decide, do I want to grow them? There's two key factors that you have to keep in mind. Do I want to grow annuals? Well, do you like the produce that it actually gives? There are very few leafy greens, lettuces, and other types of plants that you're going to get in that particular aspect out of a perennial. They're typically going to be in an annual format. So there are some plants that just naturally grow as annuals, and if you want that type of produce or fruit, then you're just going to have to grow annuals. And that's the nice thing about different plants, is based on where they're from will often determine whether they're an annual, biannual, perennial, just the overall life cycle of that plant. And that's the main important thing that I would like to impress on people. Learn about your own individual plants. Not all annuals are created equally. There are some annuals that are going to be a whole lot easier to grow than others. So in trying to decide what you want to grow and if it's worth your time and effort in growing those plants, learn about the geographic history of the plant. Learn about the climatic conditions of where they are native to. Because if you understand the native conditions of the plant and what they've grown and developed, that will understand to learn what the current conditions the plant needs to grow and help you to be much more successful in growing that particular plant. Thank you so much for joining us today in our discussion about annuals, the advantages and disadvantages. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to click on that subscribe bell, that notification for future videos. Give us a thumbs up. It really helps us out with the algorithm. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.